Take the roll.
So we don't call. Roll call.
Right.
Yes, call meeting to order.
All right. Trustee Lee Reader is absent. Gilbert, present. Aptis,
Here.
Baines, absent. Arandas,
Right.
present. Perez, absent. Smith.
Here.
Thank you.
Every time there's something different. So now my computer's good. Can we?
All opposed? Thank you.
Allegiance. The recording. I'll figure out my laptop. But no scheduled presentations today. This. Give me one minute, guys. Yeah, no worries. Is that better? Nope.
That's test.
During other Zoom meetings. As far as public comment, I have received no public comment on non-agendized items ahead of the meeting. If there's any member from the public who would like to make comments on public or non-agendized items, they may do so now. Hearing none, we'll move on to item 4.1, General Manager's Report. And I do want to just go through a couple things on the General Manager's Report. Notably, what's occurred over the last week since the publication of the agenda. So got a lot of calls and requests from this recent storm, from the media, from the public, really concerned about how we were doing as far as flood protection. So in comparison to last year when we had 14 atmospheric rivers, we were, I think, on number 10 by this same time frame last year. We had a massive storm at the first of the year, and so much heightened awareness in the massive flooding we saw in South Sacramento County last year. It's no wonder that people were curious given the coverage of this recent storm. While we saw a lot of heavy wind and rain at times, the accumulation of the precipitation didn't amount to anywhere close to the 200-year events that we had last year. The district fared very well. The exterior levee system performed as expected. The interior stormwater system and pump system performed as expected. Some of the repairs and recovery that we made from last year's events served very well and held up to this recent storm event. We did lose power at pumping plant 1B for a short period of time on Sunday morning. And fortunately, the repairs that we made last year during those events with the switch gear to the generator fired up and ran consistently and performed as expected. So that was good. Last year, we had some trouble with the backup generator at pumping plant 1B switching over during the outage. And so it performed. We made that repair last year, tested it obviously in this last event. We tested ahead of time, but there's nothing substitute for real situation test. And so we were out of power for less than 10 seconds, probably, at pumping plant 1B before it switched over and ran the generator. And so we kept pumping in that case, and that was the only pumping plant that went offline. What we have been communicating with the media and the public from those requests from last weekend's storm events and bleeding into this week is that we anticipate this flood season to be far different than last. We've made the repairs internally, although we are using old mechanical and electrical equipment that could fail at any time. It's beyond its useful life. That's been our messaging and the reality for the past 3 years, right? As we went through the capital improvement plan and the stormwater service fee, we've made the repairs as they come along necessary, but we don't know when the next mechanical or electrical failure can be, whether it's time or use. It can happen at any time, and we're as prepared as we can be given the resources we have. The thing that raises our heightened awareness and vigilance is when you get a heavy wind event combined with a saturated soil, and then you add to that, so you get a lot of down trees, right? And we saw that widespread through Northern California over the weekend. If you think back to what causes that, why we have so many more trees this year than last year with similar wind speeds, is that last year was a really wet year and we had a pretty favorable summer with large degree days. So good growing conditions for the trees. So they get this huge leaf growth, branch growth, limb growth, and a lot of those trees haven't been thinned back down. And so now you have a really saturated soil. This past weekend, we had wind directions that changed 3 times within 12 hours. So literally this event where you have this really heavy top-ended, heavy vegetative growth in the canopy, and then you're just shaking the branch or the trunk of the tree that hasn't been able to keep up with that rapid off. And so you get this unbalanced condition with saturated soils, hence a lot of trees down. So that's our biggest concern this flood season would be saturated soils, heavy canopy growth in the trees, and down trees, which lead to down power lines and power outages for extended period of time. So in that situation, we do only have one backup generator in the district. It's performing as expected, and we still have one pumping plant offline due to construction activities by the Corps of Engineers. That's pumping plant 4. Fortunately, our relationship with SMUD and PG&E has improved significantly based on our request and that relationship building to be placed on priority list for them next to hospitals and other essential services during outages. And this was a widespread outage over the weekend, and we were one of the first customers to be put back online because of that prioritization and their understanding of the essential service we provide. So that's 2 years now that relationship building has served the district and our property very well, and we'll continue to do that until we can afford to replace or install the backup generators at our all of our pumping plants or have mobile generation purpose. So we're working on that end to get the financing together, whether it's appropriations or grant funds or a small, low interest loan potential, but still not talking about bond issuance. We're still aggressively pursuing some partners to get that work done. So I wanted to highlight that. There is some information from, go ahead, Tom.
I just, do we have any trees close enough to our plants to put them at risk if a tree came down?
No, not necessarily. Surrounding the plants themselves, it would damage the pumping equipment, but there are a lot of trees along incoming power lines, right? with
Right, the
overhead
power
power.
line part, I just want to make sure we're
That's-
not collapsing on.
No, they're not collapsing. The closest we'd have is
Right on.
probably over here at pumping plant 1A and 1B at the boat storage yard. And we did some major tree trimming there about 3 years ago because a tree did come down actually on their facility. But we trimmed and thinned that out. We don't have too much around our pumping now. So the other thing would be debris that clogs up our trash racks, large debris. But we've done a pretty good job with a damn good job with our aquatic vegetation. It's just other things that get dumped in there that could plug up and back up the debris racks. So there are a couple other items in the board packet regarding some legislation. Provided that to you to read through from the California League of Cities and CSDA. I have been named to the CSDA's finance committee for this year. Start kicking that off. I think the first meeting is in March for that committee. And then CSDA has opened up their nomination period for Board of Trustees or the Board of Directors. Those applications are due again, I think at the end of April. So in March, I'll bring forward to the trustees if they'd like to nominate anyone. I was nominated last year and was not elected to the board, although I did run against the vice president of the SDA. So very well established, well respected director there. So glad he is representing us. And then lastly, I had an opportunity through CSDA to meet with Congressman Barra last Friday. The Sierra Network of CSDA and Dane Wadle coordinate these a couple of times a year, and I've been consistently asked to participate to talk about special districts in general and to advocate for Natomas and flood protection. And so it was a very good conversation with Congressman Barra. He understands our situation and is looking forward to our application for a community project fund moving forward. CSDA is leading a coalition to have a national definition of special districts, federal definition. And so we talked with Congressman Barra about the role that special districts play, particularly when appropriations or monetary monies are made available in the federal budget and how that's administered to get the funds actually to the implementer, i.e. Special district like RD 1000, and the complications of the current methodology that's used, that's usually funneled through a state agency and then awarded back out from there. When the intent, especially if it's for a specific project in the congressional budget. One other district, it was Citrus Heights Water District, has been waiting 3 years since a community project fund appropriation. They're ready to do the project and they just can't get the money freed up. And so Congressman Barra was like, well, how do we fix this? And one of the methods would be for special districts to have a federal definition of what a special district is and acknowledgement of our role. And then funds potentially could be routed directly to those agencies and not through a state agency or federal agency like EPA or FEMA that has certain inherent administrative costs. So more federal dollars are spent at a local level. And quite frankly, special districts deliver projects on time, on budget, and very quickly. And so we had that conversation with Barra, and he was very open to that and appreciative of us explaining that process to him. So hopefully that helps CSDA, and hopefully that'll help our initiative to bring in some federal dollars for our capital improvement fund. Any questions on the general manager's report? Hearing none, we'll move on. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I have the report here. Planning for the district's corporation yard update is underway. Can you share any more information on that?
I can.
Relocating our corporate yard?
Potentially, it's very early. We are in the middle of pumping plant 8 design. And part of that pumping plant design, we needed to acquire some additional space on the south, the property adjoining or adjacent to the district's channel. We needed some more room for the backup generator and switchgear and some other components that don't fit in our current pump house or on that side, on the north side. So we had approached the property owner to the south about a year ago. And in fact, we solicited about 7 different property owners within the area that could work for our project. And the loan respondent that said they were interested in a lot line adjustment was to the south. Since that of years gone by, we're working on design. We started to pick that up so we can lock that into place and then finish the rest of the design work. They have decided they want to sell the entire parcel. So we are working with KSN and an appraiser at this moment to see the cost of acquiring that entire parcel, which would serve us very well. It already has an existing tilt-up warehouse on the facility that we could use as a flood storage facility in place of Roslyn Court, which leaves opportunities available for Roslyn Court if you follow that path. I will share that information as soon as we have an appraisal and a purchase price and they're motivated to do it. They're getting out of their business and focusing on other interests. So motivated seller, motivated buyer potentially. Even if we don't develop that fully into a corporation yard, Tom, it is an asset of the district that we can then do a parcel split, get our required needs and potentially sell it. I do think there's potential for us. It's in a prime location and minimal improvements needed, but it would serve the district very well for indoor storage of equipment on that side, flood fight materials, a training center, and it's an existing facility. So minimal TIs would be needed on our part. And I think it's a good opportunity, especially if we flip that for Roslyn Court. So that's kind of what we're thinking, but we'll share that with the operations committee. And I just think it's a gem of a property for us.
I think it's a good idea to have some resources on that side of the
Correct.
basin.
And that's always been the thought for Roslyn Court, although it's been occupied by the Corps and Safegood during the levee improvement project. And then we had the request from the city for temporary housing, which we may be able to do if we acquire this other property. We get our needs met and then move forward. Lastly, I did meet with, in that regard in Roslyn Court, Gabe and I, through a previous employer, have some history with developing advertising space for potential electronic billboards. So we met with our consultant I worked with previously. There are 4 locations within our district that the district owns property on that might be potential place where we can get some passive income by placing electronic billboards on those locations or static billboards, depends on county permitting and Caltrans requirements. But we believe there's 4 locations that are ready to go, and one of them being Roslyn Court. So, yeah. So school districts, thank you, Nick. School districts in Southern California do it a lot in public facilities. So it's the experience I had in Solano County. There was a green belt in the way and a couple of things, but we worked through it and had a billboard placed on I-80 for Solano irrigation.
An RFQ or process or how you
So what we would do is the threshold for this consultant to help us with that permitting, he's going to give me a scope of services, which I'll return to the board, and he'll be our project manager for that project. Then he'll do the feasibility cost benefit analysis for those locations or others that potentially would have been identified. And then we would advertise out to an RFQ process for advertising companies to design build.
Great.
So potential income of 6 figures annually per sign. Cool. More to come. More to come. But the next step for us for Plant 8 design, to shorten it up in summary here, is to acquire that property, whether in part or in whole, so that we can finish out the design and move on to other components. And it would be great if we were able to acquire that whole parcel, because essentially we could mirror an entire pumping house, switchgear, electrical components, and don't have to worry about phasing things in over multiple years. You would essentially just switch over. And then in 30 years, we have an ideal location to start building out, before useful life in the existing location, and then switch back. So you basically pumping plants in between, and you have all your electrical components that you just switch back and forth. So anyway, I think it's a good plan, and more to come to the operations committee as we move forward. All right, moving on to item 4.2, Gabe.
Good morning.
Thank you.
So essentially we've been, the recent storms came through, so we had a lot of pumping plant maintenance, pump rounds, checking the pumps, oilers, plant operation and as a whole. We did have some homeless encampment postings along San Juan and Airport. Road and then behind Home Depot. Unfortunately, because of the weather, we couldn't access that location with our equipment. So we had to push the removals off till next week, hopefully. It really depends on ground situation, if we can get backhoe and skid steers back there. So we're working on it. We're just waiting for the weather to clear up. Some tree trimming along Plant 2 channel, and then all-weather access road, AB placement essentially. And that's really about it for us. Just been really busy at the pumping plants due to the storm activity.
I do want to mention our response to the last storm. I think I failed to, but it ties into Gabe's report here. We did send out, or I just sent out last weekend, a group text as a means to communicate what we were doing with the storm, because I figured there were calls. I want to avoid Brown Act or serial meetings. So in those responses, the group text could lead to a potential claim. So that's why I was concerned, Tom in that group message. Jolene, I did ask Jolene, and she has researched, and I've downloaded 3 different apps that you can basically, it's like a robo dial, because texting is easy and then it's not sitting in an email. So most of us carry our phones most of the time, and you'll get that alert from me. So the next time we send out an update, I'm going to try to use one of those new apps. We'll test it internally first, but it's essentially like getting a reminder from your dental office that you have an appointment that you can't respond to or something like that, but you'll get that information. So I'm going to try kind of this robo text or group text. There's 3 different apps that have really good reviews. And so I want to just try that because it works well internally for staff. And I think it'll work well for your purposes too. Because a lot of times emails, especially on a weekend, you're not next to your computer and not checking email, kind of off, but so hopefully that information was good. I just want to protect us all against serial meetings and potential Brown Act claims right on that format. So thank you for understanding my sternness at the last email or last text exchange. So I was just concerned for you. And so we'll test that out. I do want to point out we did barely exceed the 32-foot level at Verona this week. The forecast was a little bit indifferent or undetermined as we moved through the week. And then on Wednesday morning, it was, a 1/10 of an inch over the 32. We had staff on. Technically, that initiates our emergency action plan. But the forecast within the 12-hour period was going to come back down below 31. Had that happened on a weekend, we probably would have instituted our 24/7 patrol, but we felt very confident internally that we were doing what we needed to do for that period of time. We extended out to 12-hour days for the crew, but we didn't switch their schedule entirely. So it's come back down. They've opened Fremont Weir. Just knowing a couple of things going on in the system, we didn't feel that we needed to start, because once you start on that, it kind of throws this ripple effect in, and you have to transition them back. And so we're right at that threshold. We do have some calm forecasts here for the next week, but the next event potentially that brings over an inch of rain or something might just keep it up. We'll probably be at 31.5 or so for the remainder of this flood season. So as they start making reservoir releases from the Sierras, that level may come up, and we'll just monitor Fremont Weir and the Sacramento Weir. But we're right close to implementing our emergency action plan just as monitoring stages occur. So I just wanted to update you on that.
One more question. Does 32 put water in the backyards on the Garden Highway?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does. Okay. So there is water at the levee.
Discovery's got water.
Yeah, it's kind of a telltale sign as Discovery.
Yeah.
But yeah, water is in the backyards.
Discovery into Causeway is full now with the Fremont Weir opening. I think they opened down on Tuesday. We got a call from DWR on Sunday afternoon about the forecast. And so we knew that was coming, and that would provide relief down here. But yeah, 32 does put water in the backyards, even in our backyard here at the office. So, all right, thank you. General Counsel's report. Rebecca, are you on?
I am. Good morning. Speaking of downed trees, I'm home with a contractor dealing with the ones that hit our house on Sunday. So forgive me for the remote participation. You can trust that I'd much rather be hanging out with you all in person. So a pretty light month. I think the real work is really going on through your crews on the ground. A little bit of support from us on your general manager review process, which we'll talk about later in the meeting. And you can expect more from us in the coming months on that. But otherwise, we've kept it nice and quiet. So, any questions?
Yeah, Rebecca will be
Alright.
on for closed session. What's that? Rebecca will be on. Oh, okay. Thanks, Rebecca. 17 minutes. All right, we'll fly through it. On the consent calendar, any motion to approve consent? Motion by trustee Avis, second by trustee Barandis. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passed. On to item 6.1. Professional services agreement with LWA. Review and consider authorizing the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with LWA for development impact fee study update and support services. So when I was hired in 2019, the district had just previous to my onboarding adopted a development impact fee that Paul and LWA had worked on. Paul and Scott Brown are both here today if there are questions. But it's been 5 years, time for an update to that development fee, and that was called for in the initial adoption, is to just keep pace with those fees, just like we'll do with our finance plan and fee studies. And moving forward, 5 years is a good opportunity to review. So this is to review that study, update our cost, and to determine if there's a new rate that the board would then be asked to review and consider adoption of a new rate or development. To date, I don't believe we've used the development impact fee on any of the developments that have occurred, but there is potential to continue to use it as development continues in the basin. There are specific call outs and under existing agreements and conditions with the city and county for the developments that are in the queue right now that the fee didn't apply to, but moving forward, those not contemplated prior to 2018 and that are potentially coming through the queue, those being developments, the fee would apply to certain areas of the basin. And so I feel it's important to update the plan. Hopefully the board agrees. And then support services portion of it, every time we get a development project for review that's submitted by the city or county, we do ask LWA to evaluate that development, whether it fits into the fee or not, based on the APN. And if it does, provide back as a condition of approval that the development would pay for the development impact fee on conditions of approval. So every time we get a development processing agreement in, we ask LWA to take a look at it. So that's the support services, is to provide for them to evaluate whether it applies, to determine the rate if it does, and write up the conditions of approval to submit along with our other conditions of approval for that development.
Yeah, doesn't, yeah. And I do want to see, I know you have it in your Scott, relatively outreach to the building industry, certainly enforcing the Building Industry Association. Definitely want to get some feedback, from them as well, but, yeah, or doesn't.
Thanks, Nick. And my intent would be, once we have a draft updated report, is to share that with the legal committee for review, as it does have, I think that's the most appropriate place. And then so we'll get Party 1000 legal committee input on that before we finalize and bring to the board with a recommendation.
One more question.
Sure.
The impact fees, is this for our increased pumping costs or our review costs? Could you just tell me what the impacts are?
Yeah, so development
us.
impact fees,
What does it
typically
support?
what it would support is if there's any increased fee or cost of service that the district would incur, whether it's capital improvement wise or ongoing pumping costs wise, to support that development, that needs to be funded solely by the development. So the development costs that increase the district costs, whether it be long-term asset replacement vis-a-vis capital improvements to accommodate that development, or added operational costs on the district, like a larger pump or electrical costs to serve that community because they're exceeding the historic discharge rate from that parcel. Development shouldn't be held up by that, but they need to pay for that added service. So that's in general what that fee would support.
Like all the warehouse development out by the airport, that's obviously, to me, I would think that's more pumping costs because they probably can't build a detention basin
That,
big enough.
without getting into specifics about that project, but that would be a project moving forward that we would evaluate the impact. And if it did, then that's where the fee would come into place. And so each development is evaluated on its own, and then the cost determined based on our standard rates or range of rates, as Nick suggested, would then be applied as a condition of approval. Or you create a lighting and landscape district that would cover additional costs, or a community facilities district or an improvement district to cover that. So we have a similar arrangement with Metro Air Park, where they pay for the added pumping costs. And as they develop further, they owe us another pump at pumping plant 3. So, and then they pay for that added utility cost every year. And then one of the downfalls in that one is they don't replace for future capital replacement, but that's what we would build in, is that, it's fully funded so that the existing ratepayers aren't subsidizing that development.
Yeah, the other nuance there too is that new development also gets assessed the rates that are.
That's-
long-term going in. Yeah. So it's a little complicated along the these, but every stage is a way phase of
Okay, with that explanation, I'll that motion that's still up.
Yes.
Great. So we have, and so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Hearing none. Any public comment? Hearing none. All those in favor? To do that, and especially given the absence of policy that would preclude or approve similar requests. I do want to make the board aware that we do get numerous sponsorship requests for community events throughout the year. And so my commitment to the board, as we update our policies, and the goal is to have an entire policy manual, we first step in January, but to have all of our policies done, I will include include sponsorship and outreach policy in that packet that the board will have to review and finalize in June to be in July 1, starting this year. So the committee has developed this policy further, but in the meantime, bring sponsorship requests to the board as one-off for the board to advise. And checking with legal counsel, Rebecca, you can weigh in here on anything else. Rebecca seems to be struggling with sponsoring this event. With the cabinet meetings, the special circumstances, one time in the absence of sound policy to cover this. The sponsorship request is for the silver level. I put the information in the board package. That's $1,000. It includes 4 tickets to the event and some branding and recognition of the event as well. And so the district, if approved, would have 4 tickets available. Obviously, I think the limit is covered, but I'll do the check. But a limit would be 1, and then there's 3 others. So any other trustees would like to attend, they're more than welcome to do so. Let me know. Individual tickets are $75 a piece. If you want to attend on your own.
So there is some nexus to RD 1000. It's not like.
Correct.
Then that's Elena. And it is occurring within our boundaries, the event itself.
The event is outside the district's boundaries, but it does support a community group, and given the tie to our board president being recognized, there's nothing that would preclude us from sponsoring the event.
But real quick, it's on Trussell, so I don't know if it's 4,000.
Oh, sorry. I got confused. I attended another event that was downtown that I thought was on Truxell, and I got mixed up.
I'm always on the fence on these sorts of things because being corporate before this job, you always get these requests. And of course, the thought I go through is if somebody in the district said, why are you spending money on this? But the thing that tips me to support is its recognition for RD 1000. And I've said this before, is when I moved here, I knew I was in an RD. I knew you guys were 1001, 1002 or something like that. And for somebody that works in flood control his whole life long, I was kind of embarrassed. But I think the recognition for RD 1000, I want that word out there that we're active and certainly very proud of our president. So as long as it's legal, I think it provides additional exposure for RD 1000, the kind of people we have on the board. So I'm ready to support.
Definitely, and given, our elevating farm presence in the basin, and I think with stakeholders beyond just the basin, I'm really proud. First of all, they have a very distinguished group of folks, and certainly happy to support this. I certainly like those. Great honor for the great, also great party house.
So it sounds like we have a motion by
I'd
trustee
like to make the motion that we support.
and a second by trustee Abbas. Any further discussion on the board? And to support it, let me just clarify, the motion is to help respond to the sponsorship request at the silver level in their program for $1,000 to support the event. That's the motion.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So first and a second, any further discussion by the board? Hearing none. Any public comment on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Let me get back to the presentation here. At this time, we will move into closed session. Community reports we just had just prior to this. Item 7 on the agenda is committee reports. We just had the one executive committee leading up to this meeting. There are obviously SAFCA meetings coming up. So those on the SAFCA board, check in with Lindy and Rick ahead of time to make sure we have quorum. Other than that, we'll move into closed session. We'll pause the recording and ask all of those, aside from myself, to exit the room and open back up. Rebecca, you're still on? What did you
I
say?
am.
Okay, good. Okay, all right, thank you. Rebecca, do you want to go through
The report.
the report out?
Yep, and there is nothing to report out of closed session.
Nothing to report out of closed session. Back to the presentation. If I can get there. And so now we're on to everybody's favorite part of the agenda, adjournment. Is there a motion to
I
adjourn?
move to adjourn.
A motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
The cup's the go.
Oh.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.